August 13, 2025. In the disputed waters of the South China Sea, a Chinese warship chose to confront the American destroyer USS Higgins in an arrogant, reckless manner. Beijing captains shouted orders over the radio, boasting of sovereignty, while their Coast Guard vessels sprayed water cannons at Filipino fishermen, forcing them to flee like uninvited intruders in their own waters. The humiliation was bitter, the image unforgettable. Simple wooden boats retreating before giants of steel, but the American destroyer USS Higgins is no pushover. With 9,200 tons of steel and gunpowder, it was built to project dominance on any ocean with majestic serenity. A quiet reminder that American naval power still deserves respect. This was no ordinary patrol. It was a clash of pride, of law, and of power. So what really happened in that confrontation? Were any shots fired? Let's find out the truth. August 13th, 2025. At exactly 7:46 a.m., the calm surface of the South China Sea shattered into confrontation. The American destroyer USS Higgins, a 9,000-ton steel giant built for both defense and dominance, was carrying out a routine freedom of navigation operation near Scarborough Shoal. For Washington, this was no reckless gamble. It was a legal, deliberate mission, a signal that the world's busiest sea lanes must remain open no matter whose flags flutter on the horizon. But Beijing had other plans. Out of the haze, several Chinese warships appeared, their gray silhouettes cutting across the waves like predators circling their prey. Type 052D destroyers and Type 054A frigate. The sharp edge of China's naval rise closed in fast. Within minutes, they were riding parallel to Higgins, less than 500 yards away. Over the radio, a sharp voice crackled in English, thick with threat. U.S. warship, you are in Chinese waters. Leave immediately or face consequences. The intent was unmistakable. This was no routine patrol by China. It was a deliberate act of intimidation, a calculated attempt to provoke. Some ships even cut across Higgins's bow at dangerous angles, creating wakes that threatened collision. The message was clear. Yield or be forced to. On Higgins's deck, sailors tightened their grips on steel railings. Their orders were firm. Steady course, steady speed, minimal chatter. The restraint was almost unbearable. To men trained to react in split seconds, the urge to respond was strong. Every instinct screamed against this humiliation, but discipline held. Not a single missile was armed. Not a single gun elevated. For ordinary Americans, it may seem unimaginable. The most powerful navy in the world forced to endure harassment without firing back. But that is the razor's edge of modern conflict. Strength measured not only by firepower, but by control. The tension was suffocating. One wrong move, one panicked reaction, and 155 m of steel could have become the spark for a global inferno. Scarborough Shoal, a few reefs and rocks barely rising above the water, had become the stage for superpowers. And on this morning, the world came dangerously close to watching peace collapse under the weight of pride and provocation. If you were the commander of the destroyer USS Higgins, would you order the Chinese ship to be shot? Let's see what the commander of the warship decides. The standoff dragged on second by second until time itself seemed stretched to the breaking point. The Chinese ships pressed harder, edging closer, circling tighter. One frigate cut so near across Higgins's bow that the distance shrank to just 300 wide, a heartbeat in naval terms. At sea, two steel giants that size colliding could tear open hulls, ignite fuel, and kill hundreds of sailors within minutes. The Chinese captains knew it. That was the point. On Higgins, discipline held. The bridge was silent except for the steady, almost mechanical commands. Hold course. Maintain speed. The officers' voices carried calm authority, but the tension on deck told a different story. Sailors gripped the rails until their knuckles turned white. One described it later as standing in front of a loaded cannon and daring it to fire. They knew what their ship carried. 96 vertical launch cells, each one capable of unleashing tomahawks, harpoons, or SM-2S in a matter of seconds. In less than 2 minutes, Higgins could turn every hostile contact on radar into twisted wreckage at the bottom of the sea. But that was exactly why restraint mattered. To unleash such power in a moment of anger would not only sink a few ships. It could pull two superpowers representing over 1.7 billion people into open war. The burden of restraint weighed heavier than the 9,200 tons of steel beneath their boots. Still, the provocation burned. Imagine serving aboard one of America's most advanced destroyers, built at a cost of nearly $2 billion, and being forced to endure taunts and intimidation from ships half its capability. To the men on Higgins, every splash of water from a Chinese wake, every shouted demand over the radio was an insult not just to their mission, but to their flag. The frustration was real. It sat in their chests like a stone. And yet, this too was a form of power. Higgins's Spy 1D radar tracked more than 200 contacts simultaneously, marking every Chinese ship, every fishing boat, every plane overhead. The sailors knew if the order came, they could strike first, strike fast, and strike decisively. The Chinese wanted to show dominance. Instead, they revealed their desperation. On that morning, restraint was not weakness. It was discipline. It was proof that America's true strength lies not just in its arsenal, but in its control. But every man aboard Higgins felt the same truth. Patience has limits. And when those limits are crossed, the consequences can shake the world. Yet behind that silence, behind every clenched fist and steady command, lay the true measure of American power. A power not just endured, but waiting to be revealed. While Chinese destroyers and frigates prowled menacingly at close range, the USS Higgins remained steady, cutting through the waves with calm precision. To the untrained eye, the American ship seemed passive, even cornered. But beneath the steel decks lay an arsenal that could alter the fate of nations in a single hour. Higgins's vertical launch system housed 96 missile tubes, each one capable of carrying either an SM-2 interceptor, an ESSM for close-in defense, or a Tomahawk cruise missile with a reach of over 1,000 mi. In raw numbers, this single destroyer carried more firepower than the entire Philippine Navy combined. Its phalanx CIWS could spit out 45,500 rounds per minute, a wall of steel that would shred any missile or aircraft daring to approach. Its Spy 1D radar could track over 200 targets at once, separating real threats from false signals with unblinking accuracy. For Beijing's commanders, these facts were not lost. The Chinese ships in the standoff bristled with weapons. The Type 052D destroyers armed with the feared YJ-18 anti-8 ship missile, capable of streaking toward its target at supersonic speed with a range of nearly 290 mi. Each warhead packed enough explosive force to rip through a carrier's hull. Alongside them, the smaller Type 54A frigates added dozens more missile tubes, creating the image of strength in numbers. But the reality was sobering. Even with these weapons, China's flotilla knew they were shadowing a ship tied directly into the most powerful command and control system on Earth, the U.S. Navy's Aegis network. Every move they made, every radar ping they sent out was tracked not only by Higgins, but by satellites overhead and submarines lurking unseen below. In any real exchange, the Chinese captains understood their ships would be reduced to burning hulks in less than 15 minutes. And yet here they were pressing closer, desperate to capture footage, desperate to prove defiance. Their game was not military dominance, but psychological theater to show the world they would not yield. For the Americans aboard Higgins, that was the bitter truth. They held in their hands the power to erase the threat in moments, but their orders were to endure, to hold course, and to let the world see who carried authority without firing a single shot. That morning, Scarborough Shoal was more than a reef. It was a stage where America's unmatched power was measured not just in missiles and guns, but in the restraint of men who could destroy their enemies, but chose not to. America's destroyer stood tall in discipline and strength. But for the fishermen of the Philippines, the sea that fed their families became a place of humiliation. While warships measured each other in silence just a few nautical miles away, another drama was unfolding, one even more heartbreaking. At the edges of Scarborough Shoal, over 40 Filipino fishing boats tried to haul in their morning catch. For them, the reefs were not a battlefield, but a lifeline. Generations had lived off these waters, each boat feeding dozens of families back home. But that morning, they found themselves face to face, not with nature, but with China's fury. Chinese Coast Guard cutters and militia vessels, smaller than the warships shadowing Higgins, but every bit as aggressive, swooped in on the fishermen. Sirens blared. Water cannons unleashed torrancets with enough force to smash windows and rip nets from wooden decks. Several boats, some no larger than 50 ft in length, weighing barely 20 tons, were rammed and nearly capsized by steel hulls displacing 2,000 tons. The imbalance was staggering. a family's wooden livelihood against machines built to intimidate. The abuse did not stop there. Radios crackled with shouted insults, calling the Filipinos trespassers and dirty intruders. One fisherman later described the moment with tears. They chased us like we were vermin, like we were something disgusting to be cleaned from the sea. For men who had fished these grounds for decades, the humiliation cut deeper than the spray of salt water. By noon, at Lee,